We're at chapter 34, right? And there's this whole big thing that went down in Shechem. Okay? This was a big, big deal. This is in here because it was a big event. All right? This wasn't just a little skirmish here. So it would appear, now this is today, this is Nablus, okay? But this is where Shechem, biblical Shechem was, and this is the area, all right? We have a few pictures up there that are interesting. Shechem, of course, how many of you know what mountains Shechem was between? Gerizim and Mount Ebal, right. Mount Ebal was the mountain of where all the curses were spoken, and Gerizim where all the blessings were spoken when they went into the land. And Shechem is in the middle where Jacob's well was. And so when the woman at the well, she was at Shechem, at Jacob's well, and she was pointing at Mount Gerizim where they had a temple. Okay? That's some information that a lot of Christians don't know when they're reading it. Now, so anyway, Dinah went out for the night or something. She wandered off, probably checking out things, and she got caught and snapped up by Shechem, who was the son of Hamor, who was the king of the city there. And he took her in and he raped her, is what he did. And then he was all lovey-dovey, and he loved her so much and everything. And she, of course, is a young girl and doesn't really know what's going on and what to do, right? And anyway, there's more to the story you get than it's actually in the biblical account. Moses doesn't go into all the details. I mean, if Moses had gone into all the details, we'd be still reading it. Right? But obviously he puts the story in here because it's important, but he kind of gives us the overview, right? So we know that there was something going on. It wasn't just that Jacob heard about it, okay? So he found out about it, and but he didn't say anything to his sons because he was worried what they were going to do. So when they all came in from the field, he tells them the story. Now you get the impression that this was a one-time thing when you read through it, and now they're all mad because this happened, right? Isn't that the impression you get when you read it? But that's not actually, if we read a little deeper, we'll see that when they actually went to Shechem and killed all those guys, that they had to take her out of the guy's house. So she was living there. He had her. And they came to Jacob to basically ask him to give her to them after they've already taken her. First of all, how many fathers are going to like that proposition? You've taken her and raped her, and now you want her to be your wife. Hello? So Jacob's sons come in and they hear the story and they're fuming, right? And so but when then this guy has the audacity, the father, to come into their house and ask that they will give her as a wife because his son is so in love with her, he can't live without her. And even the people in Shechem are saying to him, isn't there anybody here that one of your own people, why do you have to take the Hebrew and all this? Now, again, I've read a lot of stuff, so some of that's coming out in here, okay? But it makes sense, does it not? This, obviously, something like this didn't happen without everybody knowing about it. Right? And so this became the talk of the town. And he's the ruler of the place, right? And of course he thinks, like they all do, like those people in Washington think they're better than everybody else. Hello? Don't they? So this guy thought he was better. He could just take her. He didn't need anybody's permission. And then not only does the father come, but the son comes waltzing in also into their house and giving them this big sob story how he has to have her and he can't live without her and all that. And so Jacob's sons play the game. They figured out a plan. They said, okay, just, this is good. Yeah, that's great. Well, what do I have to do? He said, and then they said, well, you all of the men in your city have to be circumcised because you can't be married to our sister if you're uncircumcised. So it was a plan that one of them came up with. I forget which one. What was it, Simeon? Oh, no, it was Simeon and Levi. These two guys. Now, why were they particularly, upset? Do you know? Because she was their sister. They're all their sisters, but she was their full sister, not half sister. Right? And so they were all upset, but these two in particular. So anyway, Simeon came up with the plan, and he said, and they said, oh, is that all? Of course, they'd never been circumcised before, so they didn't realize how painful it could be. Apparently, it's quite painful because they were laid up for like 3 days or whatever. So on the third day, apparently, they were just really sore. So that's as far as I can go with this. But anyway, they have this plan. So they wait until they go and they tell everybody and all the guys agree. Can you imagine the whole town agrees to this? Because he's the ruler, of course. We don't know what he said to them. Right? He might have threatened them. We don't know. They all agree. And so they do it. And then Simeon and Levi wait till the third day, and then they go in and they slaughter all the guys. Every one of them. And they took everything they had, and they left. So, all right. So let's pick it up there. That took us, that cut through a lot of it. Let's just pick it up at verse 25. Now it came about on the third day, while they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house, and went forth. Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, and their donkeys, and that which was in the city, and that which was in the field, and they captured and looted all their wealth, and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the houses. Then Jacob said, I think they took them to be servants, right? Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And my men, being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household. But they said, should he treat our sister as a harlot? So, how many of you think it was a little overreaction here? Yeah, maybe? Yeah, serious overreaction, okay? But the problem is, this is why when it says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, now you can understand why that is actually mercy. See, it's hard for Westerners to get that one. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that's terrible. But you see, if you didn't have that, they went in and took everything and killed everybody. Right? That's what they were accustomed to doing in those days. So this was an overreaction, extreme reaction. Now, there's no question they had every right to be very angry. And they had every right to kill him because he's a rapist. Right? Now, as you know, there was no prison sentence in those days. That was death, right? So, and he did it deliberately. And then he's bragging about it. Okay? How would you feel? That's your little sister. Okay, so we can understand. What does seem a little odd is that Jacob is not more upset. Don't you see that there? Jacob should be taking charge here, but it seems like he's backing off a little bit. What do you think? But remember, he's pretty old here. He's, he was in his 80s when he's having kids, right? He's up there. We think all this happened like in a few weeks. This took years, right? And he's getting older and older and older. He lives to be 133, I believe, or 130, thereabouts, right? So anyway, so this is a big story, and then they leave from there, because you can imagine now they're all very upset with Jacob and his family, the Canaanites. But the one thing he has going for him is that they did this. 2 guys killed all these men. And this is why their fear of God came on them, because how can 2 guys do that? Right? They thought, God is really with these people, and all these 2 guys can do all that. We better just leave them alone. Right? Now, there are other sources that tell us that later on, Jacob got into, that they actually banded together and came against Jacob later and got into some serious wars. Okay? The only reason I mention that is because some of it is a little far-fetched and doesn't seem to be right. But I think there was more, because later on we'll see when Jacob is dying, he tells Joseph that he's giving him all the possessions that he got from the Amorite with his sword. So it seems that Jacob was doing battle, and that his sons did do battle with them more than once. All right, so that's a potential. I think that kind of proves it. But anyway, but how far it went, we don't know. At this time, he leaves, right? And God said to Jacob, "Arise, go to Bethel and live there, and make an altar to God there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods which are among you. So Jacob was aware they had stuff. But he also knew they shouldn't have them. So Jacob was a godly man, a God-fearing man, keeping and following the footsteps of his father Isaac and Abraham. But he's not quite as, he seems to be a little bit more swayed by his children. What do you think? Just in fairness to him, he seems to be a little bit more, I don't know what the word is. He does the right thing always, but he seems to not do it quick enough. Okay? That's just my take. But who am I to pass judgment on Jacob, with that great man of God, right? But you do see a little hesitation here. Like, why didn't he make him put these things away before? Why wait till now? Well, he's going before God. This is a special thing. He's building an altar. So now he tells them to get rid of them. Okay. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods which they had had. So obviously they had a lot of things. And the rings which were in their ears. And Jacob hid them under the oak which was near Shechem. As they journeyed, there was a great terror upon the cities which were around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. So see, Moses tells us, that they were afraid of them. So Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who are with him. He built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, because there God had revealed himself to him, the God Most High, Bethel, the house of God Most High, right? God has revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. Now Deborah, where did you go, Deborah? Deborah, who was Rebekah's nurse, died there, and she was buried below Bethel under the oak. It was named Alon Bakoth. All right? So she's obviously a very motherly figure in the group, because she was Rebekah's maid. And why was Rebekah's maid with them? Well, we found out, it doesn't say in the text, does it? But we find out from other sources, which kind of suggests that they're probably right, that she had gone to Paddan Aram to help Rachel and Leah, to help with the family, to help Jacob with the family, because she was needed there. Obviously, she probably was very well respected and probably knew things that a lot of the younger ones didn't know, right? And for whatever reason, they called her, they kept in contact. People would have to travel in those days to bring the message, but people going back and forth, they sent messages to one another, and they sent messengers to go and talk to Isaac and Rebekah, right? So we can see that in different places happening. Now, Rebekah's death is not mentioned in the text anywhere, except at the end, Jacob says he buried her in Machpelah. But we know she died around this time, probably some sources say around the same time that Rebekah died, and Jacob got word of it. It was brought to him, and that he mourned greatly for her. But obviously he couldn't go because it wasn't that easy. It was a big project for him to move, right? And it may have already happened. By the time the messengers get to him, it'd be days, right? And, they buried their dead pretty quick. They didn't wait around. Anyway, so it's not mentioned, but there's good, lots of evidence to suggest it happened at this time. So it's kind of a double whammy. And this Deborah lady was very special, obviously, because she gets a mention. Right? Okay. Next, that there is Bethel is the site of a temple that was there. Okay. Now we know that the tabernacle was there for a while in Bethel. Okay, you knew that, right? But later on, we'll discover that when we get into Joshua and Judges and so forth. And then into the history of Israel, we'll see that Bethel was an important place. But there were other places as well that were equally important. All right, let's go now we'll finish this one. We're only at verse 9. Then Jacob, it says, again, God appeared to him again when he came from Paddan Aram, and he blessed him. Now, it seems to suggest that it gives the idea that God does it again, pronounces his new name again here at Bethel. But it also could be saying that he had done it before when he came from Paddan Aram. Much of the evidence seems to point to the fact that God did it a second time, and that wouldn't be surprising, right? But either way, your name. God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." Thus he called him Israel. God also said to him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come forth from you." So this is why we think it happened again, because he gives the whole promise to him. You follow? And kings shall come forth from you. The land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him. Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured out a drink offering on it. And he also poured oil on it. So Jacob named the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. So it was a very special place to Jacob, and it was to Israel later on. But that does not mean there's a portal there. Okay? All right. Oh, by the way, you can see that picture there? This is the mountain there. You see all those things? Those are terraces. They used to do terrace farming back in those days, and the remains of a lot of it is still there. That's how they did it in Nazareth. Jesus would have been a terrace farmer. He would be familiar with that. But anyway, they just built them up on the side of the hill and fill them with earth, and they just that's how they grew things where they didn't have enough land. Right? All right, so next. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. When she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." It came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar over her grave. That is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. It's still there today. It's still a big, big place of trouble spot where the Jews go to worship and the Palestinians get mad at them. Then Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. Okay. Now we have Reuben's big sin. All right? So you're getting everything. The Genesis is telling us everything about these people. The Bible doesn't hold back anything, does it? But there's an importance to it. And we see later on when Jacob prophesies over his children that he mentions these things. And they have an effect on their lives. Don't they? Reuben became very angry, it appears. It came about while Israel was dwelling in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Now, it says concubine, but she was his wife. But he had 2 full wives, if you would, but they were his wives as well. So, but they were given to him kind of, it wasn't really something that he went out and married them. Okay? So it was the way you know the story. But nonetheless, because he had children by them, they were his wives. Right? So they had a very special place in the family. And so this, of course, is a big sin. Now, where do Jacob and his family know about sin? Where do they know? How do they know all these things are sin? I know it's kind of a stupid question. Of course, all this comes from Noah. They were taught this by Noah, and then by Shem, and then and by Abraham, and then by Isaac, and now Jacob, and taught his children. They know these things are wrong, right? So it's called the Noahide laws. They understood what God wanted. So when Torah came along, these things were all brand new. It's important to know that. Don't you think? Right? Because people today, they just want to get rid of law altogether. But you can't get rid of law because your conscience tells you what's right and wrong. And if you want to love God, you want to do the things that God likes and not the things he doesn't like, right? So anyway, that's a little side thing there. But it's important to see it. We can miss it. But over and over, we see here how they instinctively knew. They were taught. There were things you just don't do, and this was one of them. This was a serious sin. Right? Now, why did he do it? The text doesn't tell us, but other sources tell us that he was mad because Jacob went into Bilhah and not to Leah after Rachel died, and he was angry. That's what we get from other sources. Is it right? We don't know. Okay? But it could be. It's plausible. What do you think? But for whatever reason, he's angry and he wants to get back at his father for some reason. Now, it's hard to imagine that, because it doesn't mention any kind of emotional attachment with her or anything, does it? She's his mother-in-law, sort of. She's like his mother, right? So that's as far as we can go with that. We don't have any, but I'm just telling you, some other sources say that was the reason he did it, because he was jealous. He was angry because Jacob didn't take off with Leah. And that makes sense. He's kind of sticking up for his mother, so he's going to pay his father back, kind of. But whatever the reason, he did it, and it was a terrible sin, right? Now there were 12 sons of Jacob, and it goes on to tell us about the 12 sons of Jacob. So we won't go into that. We know that already, right? So we're just told about Reuben's sin, and that's it. It's left there. We're not given any more details on it. But Jacob brings it up later on when he's dying. All right. So, verse 27, Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre of Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. So, I'll let you see, there's no mention of Rebekah. So, the Rebekah's already buried. Right? Now, the days of Isaac were 180 years. Isaac breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So Esau came back for the funeral, and they buried him. Actually, it seems like Esau was kind of coming back and forth, sort of like Jacob was doing, coming back, staying a while there, because they were shepherds. They could move around like that, and they'd plant their flocks there for a few months or a year or so, and then kind of move on. But eventually they got to the place where there was no room for both of them. And you see that Shechem, we'll see later on, that Jacob is actually grazing his cattle and his sheep in Shechem while he's actually living in Hebron. So, and the brothers have to go all the way, the sons have to go all the way up there to take care of the flock. Right? You remember, we're going to read that soon. So they were moving around a bit. All right, this is an older picture of Machpelah, the grave, the tomb, okay, where they're all buried. You can see why there's a lot of fighting over it, can't you? If you hear about disturbances in Hebron, Hebron is another hot spot, and that's why, because of the caves of the patriarchs. Doubtful their bones are in them today, which is sad. But that's probably likely to be true. I haven't been there, but I've been to lots of the prophets' graves, and the bones are gone. People just avoided them over the years. Doesn't feel good, does it? Like, I want to be buried here, and then somebody people dig up people and experiment with their bones. That's not right. That's, in my opinion, that's not right. What do you think? The guy died 1,000 years ago. You want to be buried there, and then who gives you the right to come along and say, "Well, what kind of person was he?" and put him under a microscope and all that? That's none of your business. If you want to talk about respect, that's just not acceptable, right? But those are the kinds of crazy things we do today. But in olden times, they had respect for people's graves. That's why Abraham and Isaac and Jacob had this grave in Hebron, and they were buried there, and they didn't seem to have to worry about anybody touching it. They come back years and years later and bury Rebekah there, and they bury Jacob there, and they bury, and nobody seems to have done anything to it because they had respect. All right, as they should. Then in chapter 36, we're given all of Esau's sons and family, right? So I'm not going to read all that. The descendants of Esau were the Edomites. And then Esau took his wife, verse 6, his wives and his sons and daughters, I think. Anyway, and all his household and his livestock and all the cattle and all his goods which he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to another land away from his brother Jacob. So we know he went to Edom. For their property had become too great for them to live together, and the land where they sojourned could not sustain them because of their livestock. So Esau lived in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. So Seir is down here. It's in, where it is. It's Port Petra is. What's the other place? Slips my mind right now, the other city there. But they're all the mountain cities, and they're in Jordan today. Okay? So, we got to Joseph. We're doing really good. We're going to finish. All right, Joseph. Now the story changes, and the rest of Genesis is about Joseph and the whole thing that happened with him. And it's the most moving part of the Bible, I think. I mean, I find it hard to read it without losing it. I don't know about you, but it's just incredible. Anybody else had that experience here? Okay. So I'm going to try to read some of it, but I don't know how much of it I'm going to read because It's just, as many times as I read it, I still get the same feeling every time I read it. It's so powerful. Now, Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. And it goes back and tells us, when Joseph was 14 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age. That's totally understandable. I know how that feels. Anybody here know how that feels? It happens. All right? You don't mean to. You're not trying to show favoritism, but it can happen. Because if you're old and then you have a son that you never thought you were going to have, you can see how it changes the way you... And of course, when you're older, you're, how should I say, more relaxed, more peaceful about. You're not so worked up over everything. When you're a young parent, you think that you're so worried about making mistakes and you're really on it all the time. But when you get older, and then you're kind of, secure in your role, and it's not quite as stressful. But physically, I suppose. But in those days, with the kind of help they had, probably wasn't that stressful. They had maids to do everything. Wouldn't that be nice? Bet you guys would like to have maids, huh? No, nobody wants to answer that. I'm a little scared. But, all those things that you have to do that you could just have somebody else do. But anyway, Joseph is only 14 years old. So he's going out, right? And he's a little snitch, according to them, right? So he goes out and he sees that they're not doing things right, and he goes back, tells the father, right? And then he starts having dreams. And he had this dream. I'm sorry, I left out. They got to the point where they just so hated him that you couldn't even speak to him in friendly terms. So things were bad. They just couldn't even look at him. They really fell into the hatred. Now, that's another thing. Jacob didn't seem to clue into that. Well, where was his head at? So you see what I mean? There's some lapses of judgment here that he should have been on. But God uses all those things, even Jacob's lapses, right? They should have picked that up and scolded his sons or tried to sort that out, shouldn't he? But he didn't. Then Joseph had dreams, right? And when he had told it to his brothers, the first dream, they hated it even more. And he said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." Now, if you were his brother and you heard that, what would you feel? Right? But in reality, he's really getting a dream from God, and he's just trying to tell them. Now, is he gloating over it a bit? I don't know if that's necessarily true. Probably, but he's only a kid. Think about it. And his brothers are much older than him. And they should have been paying a little bit, they shouldn't have been acting so silly either. They were obviously acting very jealous, weren't they? Right? But here's the deal. Joseph saw it, and he didn't know what he was seeing. Right? And that's what people do with dreams. They get dreams, and they, misinterpret them or don't know what to do with them. And they start telling them to people, which they probably shouldn't do. Right? Hello? Anybody ever done that? And you're like, why did I do that? Because they're not going to see what you're supposed to see. So anyway, but God was showing him something that was going to happen. And I bet you he thought about those dreams a lot in the days ahead. What do you think? Then the second one he had was a sun, moon, and 11 stars. He said, "Lo, I have still another dream, and behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." He related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him. So his father's not even getting it, right? And said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? So Jacob understood the dream was about his family, right? And so this is where we understand in Revelation 12 when it talks about the sun, moon, and stars, right? With the woman that's clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet in a crown of 12 stars. We understand that to be Israel. This is where we get it from. The nation of Israel. All right. So the father doesn't get it, and his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept a saying in his mind. So, that's interesting. What's that all about? Right? He probably knew it was from God, but it sounded kind of weird. And maybe we get some of these things and we don't understand them. We need to table them and keep them in your mind. Don't forget about them. Just hold on to them and see what it is God is saying and doing, because later on they come around and we realize, oh, that's what I had in my dream. Right? Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem, and this is a very sad story, but Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to them, I will go. Then he said to them, Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, Now, do you think that was a man or an angel? I think it was an angel. What are you looking for? And he said, I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock. Now, see, a man doesn't just show up and know exactly what you need. Right? It can happen, but generally, no. Right? Then the man said, They have moved from here, for I've heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. All right. Oh, I didn't mention the coat of many colors, but you saw it there in the picture. That they were especially jealous of that because his father made him the special coat of many colors, and they were really mad over that. So they didn't like that at all, because it showed how much the father loved him. And he didn't give them any special coat, right? Verse 18, and they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, Here comes the dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, A wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams. Think they had a little anger issues. But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, Let us not take his life. Reuben further said to them, Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, and that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father. So he was hoping if he get him to put him in the pit and then go away, that he would come back and rescue him, right? So it came about, when Joseph reached his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, without any water. Now think of the story of Joseph is so close to the story of Jesus, is just beyond belief. First, Jesus had his garment that was all woven together, and it was a very nice and expensive garment, right? And the soldiers wouldn't tear it up. They cast lots for it. So it's kind of similar, isn't it? Then they sat down to eat a meal, and they raised their eyes and looked. Behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh, on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Very interesting how Judah later is the one that has to, give himself in order to save Benjamin. so that you can understand how that really touched Joseph, because he was the one who had said, okay, let's sell him. Right? Do you think that maybe all those years he could hear that playing in his head? So then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph to Egypt. Now, you look at the story, okay, he has this great vision, right? He has these great visions. God is speaking to him about what he's going to do with his life. And then everything seems to go, south to HE double hockey sticks, right? I mean, can you think of a worse situation? Being sold by your brothers, being thrown in a pit, and they wanted to kill you, but instead they sell you. And the kid, they left him there, and he's crying and screaming for hours and hours and hours, days, I believe. It's a pretty awful story, really, isn't it? Now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He returned to his brothers and said, the boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go? So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood, and they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not, as if they didn't know. Then he examined it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. So Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. So Jacob loses it after that. He never comes back until eventually he does, but he loses it, right? And you can understand what a horrible situation. Anyway, let's go on. Then the story changes here. The story just changes then. Joseph is now in Egypt. His father's brokenhearted. His sons are obviously probably brokenhearted also, because now the full weight of what they've done is on them, right? And it came about at that time. Now, the Bible doesn't, we follow the story, but it seems like it's happening the next day, but you have to understand, years are passed here, right? And it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. Now this is a guy, that's what we're getting, a friend of his. Okay, this wasn't a woman. But Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. Now see, what is it that he's not supposed to do? Yeah, marry a Canaanite, right? And he took her and went into her, so she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Probably should have named him but anyway. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and he named him Onan. She bore still another son and named him Shelah. And it was at Chezib that she bore him. So Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Now, the text doesn't tell us where he got her, but it doesn't say he got her from the Canaanites. Other sources tell us that he got her from the Shemites, that he got her actually, and he went east and got her from Eber, the children of Eber, who was the son of Shem, right? Is this true? Well, sometimes what's omitted is as important as what's put in. You follow? So it's omitted where he got her, but if she was a Canaanite, I think it would have said it. So it's left out. So maybe he's getting the message that he shouldn't have married a Canaanite, but anyway, he has, right? And so he took the wife, right? Now it says, verse 7, but Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Okay. So, well, he wouldn't do that. Let's see, the God of the Old Testament, he's mean. See, that's what they think, isn't it? But you see, this is God's mercy. Now, when it says that he was evil, it really means he was evil. It wasn't just something he did. There's also some things that say that maybe suggest he did the same thing that his brother did. Okay, we don't know for a fact, but he was evil, period. Right? Now, see, the Bible knows that there are evil people, but we don't seem to know it today. We think that people are just misguided, or they just need some more drugs, or they need some more loving, or whatever. But there are people who are genuinely evil. And here, he marries a Canaanite, has a son, and the son is evil. Whoa, what a surprise, she said. Well, there's something going on here, right? And then his brother, now Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife. Now, why does God kill him? Because God doesn't want evil in the seed. From Judah's loins comes the Messiah. So God intervenes sometimes, folks, and takes people out. And he still does it today. It's not his favorite thing to do, but sometimes God will protect his plan. And this man is too close, and he's evil. You understand? What effect would he have had on the family? And then his brother is the same. So two of them. The other guy seems to have managed to survive. So we don't know what happened there, but obviously, whether there's a seed thing going on here, whether this is the fruit of the Nephilim, or whether this is just the fact that he's trained in evil as a child, right? I'm sorry, not as a child. His parents, his family is trained in evil, have passed it on to him in his DNA. But the Bible says he was evil. We have to accept that's the true. And how many of you know there are evil people? I could name a few right now. Okay? And you could too. But our Western culture does not want to accept that. People are basically good. No, they're not. No, they're not. We have to be made good by God. Amen? On our own, we're not. So he told him to go in and do what was right and create offspring for his brother, right? And Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so when he went in to his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so he took his life. And he didn't ask anybody about it either, right? So this is number 2 taken out. Now, it wasn't just about what he did. This is where people get wrong. Oh, well, he did that, oh gosh, If it was about that, there'd be a whole lot of people dead. Don't you think? Hello? Okay. No, it wasn't about that. It was just the self-centeredness of this person. The evil that was in his heart that was manifesting. It's like God gave him another chance and he blew it. And he took him out. So God's not going to let Judah's seed be perverted or twisted. Because who knows what that evil people in your family can do. Right? What can they do to a family? All right. Does that make sense? It's amazing how when we stick with the prophecy of the seed, how it all makes sense and fits together, isn't it? This whole thing comes together. Now we understand that story in a way we never really did before. Okay. Now after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. That's more intervention from God. What do you think? 3 kids, 2 of them dead. Maybe it's not. Maybe you shouldn't have any more children with this woman. Problem. Huh? Do you see that? Now, does that mean she went to hell or whatever? No, I don't think it means that. It means that God took her out because, not a good idea. You shouldn't have married her. You understand? So, but Sheila seems to have made it through. All right, but here's the story gets even more fascinating here. So when the time of mourning was ended, now see this I don't know if you read that. I read this many times over the years, and I thought that's just the story of how sinful Judah was, but it didn't really connect with me as to what was happening. Right? But you're starting to see something going on here. We're starting to see these guys marrying more women, and we're starting to see them transgressing laws. And being Judah here is used, I think, as an example to show us how things are starting to go wrong. And you know they always do. We got one generation, Abraham, then we got Isaac, all going good, Jacob, all going good, and then the next one starting to go bad. Right? Not that they were evil or anything, but they're starting to do things that they were not supposed to do. And I think you're seeing why God takes them out of Canaan and puts them down on their own in Egypt where they have to be alone. So they don't mix with the Canaanites anymore and corrupt the seed further until God can bring forth the Messiah. So he brings them into slavery. So he can do it. He delivers them by bringing them there and then does an incredible deliverance by taking them out. Then he can teach them, train them, and to be his own people, see. Yeah. Because if they had stayed in Canaan, I think they would have been lost. I think another generation would have blown it. It would have been over. They would have been mixed, and the Nephilim would be Hebrews. You know, be really mixed up. God wasn't going to let that happen. Does that make sense? All right. So when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went to his sheep shearers at Timnah. He and his friend Hira. Now that makes sense to me because I know that in my time when I was a kid, my father was one who used to shear sheep for all of our neighbors. And you know, there's a gift to it. You really have to be good at it. Some people couldn't do it very well at all. They'd be cutting the sheep and everything. It'd take forever to do it. It was a trade. You learned how to do it, and you get them down and get it all done, and they're up and out, because you have like hundreds of them to do, right? So it was a special. In those days, of course, they had no machines or anything. It was all by hand. And I remember when they did it by hand. Do you remember that? Okay. So you had to know what you're doing. You'd be cutting off the wrong things. Oh yeah, they don't just sit there and say, "Please shear me," you know. So it's a trade, and you see why you had to go a long distance sometimes to get these guys. These were hired people who did this for a living, and so it makes sense when you look at it that way. See, we didn't grow up. People who didn't grow up in that culture don't understand what's he going all the way up there? He was like way up there, right? All right. Some of you don't care about this, I know, but that's all right. Because it's sheep. You don't really care that much. But anyway, so he went up there, and it was told to Tamar, "Behold, your father-in-law is going to Timnah to shear his sheep." So she removed her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat in the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. And she's like, this is wrong, right? And she's probably like, her life is ruined now. She doesn't know what to do, right? When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road. A little bit of sin on the side here, huh? And said, here now, let me come in to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? He said, therefore I will send you a young goat from the flock. That's a nice gift. She said, moreover, will you give a pledge until you send it? He said, what pledge shall I give you? And she said, your seal and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. In other words, your wallet and your credit cards and your driver's license. Right? So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. How about that? And she arose and departed and removed her veil and put on her widow's garments. And many of you know she's pretty shrewd. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. He asked the man of her place, saying, where is the temple prostitute who is by the road? Now notice he says temple prostitute. So obviously he's among pagans, and they're already doing this stuff. Right? They're already doing the pagan worship with temple prostitutes. So the land is becoming more and more perverse. The Canaanites are getting worse and worse. You can see why God is about to take them out of there, can't you? Right? Till the Amorite sin comes to fullness, till he brings them back to confront it and to destroy them. All right. I did not find her, and furthermore the men of the place said, there has been no temple prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep them. Well, now he's like, gee, what am I going to do now? She's got all my stuff, but let her keep them. Right? So he went and got another driver's license and another wallet. But you see, he's embarrassed now. Like people are going to find out if I keep going on about this, right? So just shut up about it and leave it. Let her keep them, otherwise we'll become a laughingstock. After all, I sent this young goat, but you did not find her. So I said I did my part, and she wasn't there. Now it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is also... I'm reading this because I really think this is important. It just shows the hypocrisy that people of God can get into, right? I mean, Judah is a man who knows the Lord. I mean, he knows what's right. I'm not saying he knew the Lord in the same way perhaps as his father, but he's been around for all that stuff, so he knows the Lord. But yet, he's doing things his father never did, right? And what else is new, right? So anyway, now his reaction is so important to see. So, the men of Judah, where was I? It was 3 months later. Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, what do you think he said? Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Bring her out and let her be burned. It was while, you see, God is dealing with his heart, isn't he? He's after his heart. Then it was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man to whom these belong. And he said, please examine and see whose signet ring and cords and staff are these. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I. Yeah, I can say that again. Inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not have relations with her again. So, as I always say, there are other sources that say that he was pretty broken up over the whole thing and that he really repented before God. and all that. Doesn't say that in the text, but you do get that impression, don't you? That he was realized he had done wrong and he had sinned and changed his heart attitude toward her. Right? We do get that. He didn't leave her. He took her, but he stayed away from her because it was obviously the wrong thing to do. Right? Being incensed, pretty much, since she was his son's wife. Are you there? Okay. But he did his duty, and he took care of the kids, and he took them as his own. And Perez became the father from whom the whole messianic line comes. How about that? So God used it, even though Judah screwed up pretty bad. God turned it around and used it for good. Amen? But notice, she was not a Canaanite. She couldn't have been a Canaanite, because there's no way Perez would have been a Canaanite, and then being the one who's given birth to the Messiah. You see? All right. How are we doing? A few more minutes? Yeah? So next time we'll definitely finish. So it makes sense. I saw that we were going to be tight, so I backed up a bit and just take a little bit more time with it. All right. So, the story of how they were born is pretty interesting. It came about at the time she was given birth that, behold, there were twins in her womb. Moreover, it took place while she was giving birth, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But it came about as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. Then she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." So she named him Perez, breach, I guess. Afterward, his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. And I bet has something to do with the scarlet thread. Do you want to look it up? All right. So you're getting the whole picture here. We're getting a little glimpse into some of the breakdown in these brothers, or how they're, Simeon and Levi went over the top, right? Self-righteousness. A little bit of self-righteousness going on here. Judah has a self-righteous problem here. Has to be confronted by the Lord, right? You see that? There's some issues. And Reuben definitely got off the track, sleeping with his father's wife, right? So there's some problems here that have to be dealt with. Anyway, I think that's why we're getting that picture. That's been told to us. And then it goes back to Egypt again. We're being told how there's issues here. Things are deteriorating a little bit. These guys need to get out of Canaan. That's what I think is being said. Anyway, you ever thought of that before? No. All right. So I think we'll stop there.